Hey folks, this is Dr. Emily Strading with AR, and it's time to talk about California. This is a big state. It's got tremendous landscape diversity, and that means it's got a tremendous diversity of challenges ahead. And let me tell you, we know a lot about those challenges. To give you some perspective on the density of the current information, one of the things I do when I write these forecasts, I see how many times the state is mentioned in that big federal report I use. Sometimes it's like 5 times, means I got to go dig deeper. Or it might be like 50 times. I got a nice robust pile of initial resources. In California's case, the report mentions the state 461 times. So let's just say the data on California is overwhelming. It can be hard to access that much information. And let's get real. If you're watching this from California, your question is not, are things going to get bad? I know how it's been going there. I lived there in 2018, big fire year. If you're watching from California, you want a realistic assessment of where conditions are going, what you can do in response, and where you can find some hope. We're going to get that information to you. Okay, before we look at some maps, though, we need to set the stage, because the more I learned about the state's projections, the more I could see that there were really entwined systems that needed to be talked about here. This video, we're going to talk about the power water system challenge the state is facing and the drought heat feedback system it's caught in. And the next chunk of the video, we're going to talk about projected weather changes, particularly in the wet season, and how that relates to wildfire risks. And we're going to connect that to the land and sea, get you some really serious info on California's coasts and ocean economy. We'll bring everything together as we consider impacts on human health alongside direct actions. If what you care about is your local outlet, don't worry, we're going to look at maps with highly localized information throughout both parts. Okay, we're going to get started. California, you got the biggest, best characterized problems in the nation, and we're going to break them down. California's future, it depends on power and water. We need both flowing, and in California, more than any other state, they're deeply entwined with each other. A lot of power generation in California is hydroelectric or thermoelectric. Both of those methods require water, either directly or indirectly. So bottom line, power needs water. Then consider the State Water Project. The SWP, it gets water to 27 million Californians. That's almost 7 out of 10 people in the state. They drink from the State Water Project. Give a little context, only 1/3 of the SWP water goes to agriculture. The State Water Project is the single biggest energy consumer in the state. So water needs power. As we struggle with water in California, we're gonna struggle with power. If the power gets messed up, the water delivery is gonna get messed up. If water is unavailable due to drought, or if there's a disruption in the power needed for pumping, your ability to generate power is going to go way down. I want you to look at this power map here. Power generation is likely to be very impacted by mid-century in California. Here we go. You see these sort of orange colored dots and the peach colored dots, that's a 10 to 20% max decrease. So we can see the power generating capacity in the state. There's a couple of bright spots, right? But in general, we're trending down because of that dependence on thermoelectric and hydroelectric power. If you're a ride or die Californian, if you're concerned about preparedness and you're devoted to staying in the state, you should be very aware that if there are power disruptions, those are going to lead to water disruptions for right now, 7 out of 10 Californians, and consider that in your preparedness. What we're looking at here, this widespread decrease in projected power, we know it's related to the drought. The drought has caused a reduction in efficiency or totally shut down some of the hydroelectric generators, and it's caused a decrease in efficiency in thermoelectric generation already. Those trends are projected to continue, and that's exactly what we're seeing on that map. Fortunately, there is a direct action that we can take that'll take some of the stress off of this system loop, the water power system loop, and that is distributed solar. Distributed solar or rooftop solar could make up a substantial portion of the projected energy deficit in the state by 2050. Distributed solar would give the state power that didn't rely so much on this power water system and would let us keep our footprint inside our cities, not mess up as much wildlife habitat as a big solar field. San Diego has done the math locally. Rooftop solar would take care of 2/3 of the projected power deficit in their area. So that's a very hopeful note here. This is a way out of this loop that the state is trapped in. But let's look more at the water issues. Let's learn about how they're impacting power. Let's check out the reservoirs, get a clear look at this. So first, we're going to look at the reservoir levels in Lake Mead. We can see in 2022, we're not in a good place, right? We're starting out very low compared to the last 5 years. And I'm sorry, I don't have great visualization data to look at the last 30 years. And of course, if you're looking at this trying to find some hope, you would anticipate that this level is going to increase over the next couple of months as we start to get some snow melt from those great snowstorms that we had in the Sierras. But we can see it's unlikely that we're going to get up to recent water levels in Lake Mead. And Lake Mead gives water to people in Las Vegas, of course, but also in San Diego and Los Angeles. So this is very low, and it is different from the historical situation. We know that because this is the first year where there are big cuts in the Southwest water allotments. It's hitting farmers in Arizona first. They're getting big cuts to their water allotments. It's going to massively impact many farmers in the state this year. But this is just one reservoir, right? We can see this, just this one reservoir is low. Let's go look at some more of California's reservoirs. Just a second, I'm going to show you a state that might be a state website might be interesting to you if you're looking at water in your specific area. So if we look at this, this is from the Department of Water Resources, and they do actually update it every day. They do a good job. We can see that not all of the reservoirs are as low as Lake Mead. If we look at the reservoirs throughout the state, we're able to see where they are, if you hover over them, what the historical average is at this time of year, and the blue bar where we are right now. So we can see that there's some reservoirs that are doing pretty good, but that overall, they're running kind of between 50 and 80% of their historic average. Just eyeballing it, it looks to me like we're probably coming in at like a 65, 70% of historical average. And some of our reservoirs that have big hydroelectric generating stations associated with them, like Oroville, are not doing good, considering the fact that this is the season where we would want them to be filling up. They're low. It's going to be a continued problem. And this is very unfortunate. You know, what we're looking at here, it is part of a natural cycle for the landscape, right? The Southwest is currently in a drought that is more than likely part of the natural cycle for the region. It's gone through this cycle before, and it's had a major impact on people living here before. The Four Corners region used to be one of the most densely populated parts of the United States, and the mega drought in the late 1200s, it just massively disrupted the Pueblo culture. And there's cultural memory of that. People tell stories about that today throughout the Western tribes. You know, we're talking about like a Black Death level of cultural memory. It's a kind of enormous tragedy, enormous disruption that people tell stories about for hundreds of years, for generations. So it's not like we didn't have any warning that in the West we were going to get walloped by this big drought again, and we are getting walloped by it. This cycle, it's already the worst drought in the area in 1,200 years. We can tell from tree rings, from lots of historical evidence. And the increased heat in the area is making it even worse. I want to show you this historical increase in heat. So we're not talking about climate change right now. We're just talking about changes looking backwards over the last 100 years. It's not a projection. Just a second, I pull it up. All right. So this is from 1901 to 2016, pretty recent contemporary data. We can see that California has experienced locally some of the most intense changes in the Southwest, particularly if we look here around sort of the greater Los Angeles basin and the desert to the east of it. About a 3-degree change in the average temperature over the year. It's not going to be a big shock to any of us that as it gets hotter, plants are going to consume more water. You're going to have increased water needs in an area. The heat is also going to dry out the soil, making it harder for soil to retain moisture, depending on the particular environment, the individual soil composition. So this increased heat that we're experiencing compared to historical conditions, that's going to intensify the drought. And now, you know, we've kind of got an eye on what's been going on the last 120 years. I want to show you a couple of different types of heat projections. Unfortunately, we are looking at pretty alarming increases in both typical summer heat and extreme heat. I'm going to show you the extreme heat first, because that's an easier, like, one shot to visualize thing. Just a second, let me pull it up. All right. So this is from the NCA, and we're looking here under the high emission scenario where we don't reduce emissions by mid-century. We would be looking at a change in the number of days over 90. In the Bay Area, it's not so bad up here, but down by Los Angeles, it's pretty bad. Inland, you could be looking at 50 to 60 more days of extreme heat, and this is a densely populated area. I'll tell you straight up, the federal government is very concerned about the people of Los Angeles. This is one of the areas that is most highlighted in the national report as having the potential for a mass heat fatality, because people do not have air conditioning in this area. So if you're in this area, you're ride or die, you want to stay there, you should be looking at power independence and ways to keep cool under prolonged periods of extreme heat that will stress the contemporary power grid. I'm sorry to give this dire warning. You know, that's not like the business I'm into. We try to be hopeful here, but this is an area where preparedness is essential, particularly for people in this part of the state. This part of the state is one of the areas that the federal government is most concerned about heat-related disasters. All right, soapbox off for that. Let's look at some heat information for people outside of LA, okay? We're gonna go over to the USDA heat map and look at more of a typical summer, okay? All right, here we go. So we got a gigantic state here. We were talking about the Los Angeles area. Instead, we're gonna go talk from the north, walk down to the south, get a good look at everybody's place. So up here in Northern California, this is the contemporary heat map. It shows data from 1980 to 2009. And we can see that historically, this area has enjoyed a pretty cool summer. Unfortunately, we know that since 2009, this area has heated up considerably because of the tree death, which we're going to talk about more in a few minutes. When you lose the tree cover, when you lose plant communities anywhere, but it's very, very applicable to California, you get further into this drought heat feedback system. To the degree that we're able to do so, fighting the tree death and trying to practice reforestation will be important, but we have to do that in the context of increased heat. We won't be able to bring back the same pine forests that were in this area because the pines cannot survive the heat conditions that have developed in the area. All right, let's look at the projection. If we can work the most likely reduced emissions scenario, we're going to look at RCP 4.5 for mid-century. And we can see that in good part because of the tree death, we have a tremendous heat up in this corner, which to me is so very unfortunate. I hate seeing this kind of thing happen to the more remote places. That's the kind of place I think is nice to live myself. Lots of room to breathe, nice agriculture, outdoor stuff to do. I hope that communities in this area can get word of these challenges and start looking into really serious water solutions. You know, the big coastal cities, desalination technology is at a point, the cities are going to keep drinking no matter what. Desalination is expensive, it costs energy, but we're already using that tech to keep people drinking in Texan cities. I think the coastal cities are going to be able to handle water if push comes to shove, but I worry about the communities in this area particularly. These smaller, these more remote agricultural communities. People who live in places like that, we know we have to take care of ourselves when things get hairy. There are ways for people in these communities to be building water resilience. There are different farming techniques you can use to maintain agriculture. There are different water conservation techniques that we can continue to put into effect. And Very important on an individual level. There are interesting new water gathering techniques that have been pioneered, particularly in Israel. We can get ready, and we gotta get ready for increased cyclic drought conditions in this area. Let's go look at some more parts of the state here. I'm gonna switch us back to historical data, and we'll go down below Sacramento. We'll get a look at the Bay Area and the Central Valley's projected changes. Right now, we know the Bay Area is characterized by its cool summer, and we know that anywhere that is vaguely affordable for a human being to live, such as Fresno, has a very warm summer. In mid-century, unfortunately, we expect a substantial heat up in areas with affordable real estate, and we can see that there will also be a push where the eastern margins of the Bay Area, the northern margins of the Bay Area will become hotter. I expect that to cause further disruption to the successful wine growing. Let's go back and forth here another time. So here's our contemporary. And there's the projections for 2050. Notice a big heat up in San Jose too. You can see, look at the margin here for the mountains, for the Sierras, contemporary versus projected. It holds the margin fairly well if we stick to RCP 4.5. I want to show you if we go to 8.5, if we don't reduce emissions, what will happen? We lose the margin on the mountain, right? We lose tremendous mountain coolness, which is going to have big impacts on the water cycle. I'll talk about that more later, but I want to show you this as a warning. If we don't keep to 4.5, we lose a tremendous amount of our potential snowpack on the Sierras. Very concerning. All right, back to today, back to our contemporary data, and scrolling down, we're looking at the bake down to Los Angeles. Contemporary. Unsurprising, affordable areas to live, hot and unpleasant. Let's see how much more hot and unpleasant they're going to get. Unfortunately, substantially is the answer. And we can see that that heat up in Los Angeles, even under the moderate scenario, it really is driving these red areas, which mean prolonged summer heat way closer to the sea. Here, we're going to back. So here is contemporary. There's contemporary, there's 2050. So even some of your wealthier communities like Long Beach, Huntington Beach, they're going to fall into this heat island, this big urban heat island around Los Angeles. Whew. So that's rough. There's a lot of reasons to fight for 4.5, to fight for moderate emissions. The biggest reasons, I think, they're up in that northern half of the state, particularly the northeast corner. And if we look at the mountains, if we think about the snowpack, if we think about the impact it would have to lose the snowpack on the state, we need to fight for moderate emissions in California. Oh, we got to get ready for this. There's going to be big changes, even under the best case scenario. But like I said, there's a lot more that we can do to develop water resilience in the face of drought. And I have to say, the cities, Los Angeles has done a lot already to try and prepare for this. Without a realistic look at how serious things are going to get, how hot things are going to get, we can't prepare ourselves. We can't upgrade the power infrastructure. We can't upgrade the cooling infrastructure. So hopefully you see these big changes and you see it as an opportunity for action rather than as something that just makes you afraid. We're going to try and move forward. We're going to talk a little bit more about the drought, because with the drought right now, many people are making a short-term logical choice and they're pumping the groundwater to make up for the lack of surface water. In the Central Valley, we know a lot of farmers are pumping groundwater. And everyone's all mad about that, right? Because it's very serious. The groundwater is getting very low. But we gotta remember, no one's pumping the groundwater because they think it's fun or because they think it's a great long-term decision. People are pumping the groundwater because they're trying to hold on to their land And corporations are pumping groundwater because they're going to sell our future overseas in the form of almonds. Collectively, we've got to find a way to stop pumping the groundwater. Because if we want farmers, regular human farmers, families who are just trying to hold on their land, if we want them to stop, they need targeted assistance to help them make an economically tolerable transition. These are people who are hurting, and all of us, everyone involved, knows it is likely to get worse. With the likelihood of this drought getting worse before it gets better, we should expect 60 years of it before it lightens up again. We might need that groundwater, right? We got to hold on to it and keep it safe. Okay, we talked about water and power. We talked about drought and heat. And many of you, maybe your mind goes in the same direction as mine. We're going to talk about fire next. And you probably know in California, we can't talk about fire without talking about the wet season. So we have another systems concept coming up. But I got to take a break. You take one too. We'll come back. We'll start talking about that rain fire system.